Very exciting trade, politics and security panel, perhaps all a little bit in together again. Just introducing people, Stephen Jacobi. Stephen is probably our most prominent business diplomat in New Zealand. He's across the International Business Forum, Jacobi Consulting, Apec, you name it. Penny Tucker, a long-time advocate for the United States, also Executive Director of the US Council, and NZ US Council, and a long-time Washington person back in the day as well. John Ballingall, Sense.Partners, an economist, and also has presented some new research which he'll talk about. Ben King, Deputy Chief Executive Policy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, has played a significant role in developing some recent policy which he'll be able to talk to us about. So, because we're under a bit of time pressure on this one, we'll get underway and I'll just join the panel. But maybe, Stephen, if you could start with some of your reflections on APEC and also IPEF, which we heard a bit about earlier. We had expected a major kind of early harvest from IPEF. I think it didn't quite fit what you expected, but anyway, you could talk to that.
Thank you very much, Fran. Kia ora tātou e te whānau. Kua tau mai. It's a great pleasure to be with you all in this room and to hear from our distinguished speakers earlier today and to be on this distinguished panel with some good friends of mine as well. So thank you for the opportunity. So yes, look, APEC came and went in San Francisco. The banners up around town proclaimed that APEC was going to be epic. And you know, I think it was epic because in the way of these APEC meetings, it was a great gathering of leaders from around the Asia-Pacific region, high-powered business people, stakeholders, lots of different people, lots of different meetings centered on the Moscone Center in downtown San Francisco. Everybody had a great time, even the large number of protesters which were there who didn't lack for things to protest about. But, you know, it's in the nature of these things that they generate quite a bit of kōrero and, you know, a lot of heat and occasionally some light. And I have to say that San Francisco put on its very best face for APEC, highlighting its, you know, connections with Asia Pacific in particular. So great to be back. And the United States deserves a lot of congratulations, if I can pass that on, Ambassador, for running a great APEC, a very substantive APEC year. The meeting itself well attended by leaders, as I mentioned, ministers. Our APEC Business Advisory Council, which advises the leaders of APEC, had a very good meeting wrapping up its year. Interesting enough, it was in this very room back in February on the day of the cyclone that we commenced the working year with our friends from ABAC USA at the meeting we hosted. And the CEO Summit in San Francisco brought together a lot of big names from US business. And indeed, quite a few from New Zealand business, Fran, and others who were there. Look, the APEC Leaders Golden Gate Declaration has a lot of really good things in it, particularly about inclusion, about sustainability, all the things you'd like to see, even support for WTO and the free trade area of the Asia Pacific, also very good. The meeting between Presidents Biden and Xi was extremely constructive. I don't think it has solved all the problems that might exist between these two great countries, but it has certainly put a much more effective layer of governance over the relationship and calmed everybody's fears, and the resumption of military-to-military contact was all very positive. But look, all that's great, and I think we need to celebrate that. But behind the scenes at APEC, I have to say, there was a fairly obvious disconnect between the views of US business on the one hand and what prevails politically today in the United States. Our ABAC colleagues in ABAC USA are all still focused on achieving more regional economic integration, stronger trade rules, more resilient supply chains, and an open digital economy. But politicians in the United States, it would seem, and a lot of people who vote for them, are wanting something different. the mood today, and we've heard this from other speakers, the mood in the United States is inwardly focused. And we're hearing a lot more about subsidization, protectionism, decoupling, de-risking, small yard, high fence, all of these things that is not the sort of things we used to hear about from the United States once upon a time. Things change, I understand that, but it is a different atmosphere on those particular issues. And it runs right across the partisan divide, and it's not to say there are not active champions for a more, what would one say, open and liberal view of the world. There are. And this came to head pretty much in the IPEF negotiations. You've heard about the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. And in San Francisco, it was, and thanks to the hard work of our negotiators from New Zealand, I see Mark Sinclair in the room, who worked very hard on this, and his team, we got the supply chain pillar, or they got the supply chain pillar signed and sealed, and substantial conclusion of the fair economy and clean economy pillars. But on the trade pillar, things didn't work out so well. And it was not possible to complete what, as we understand, was a deal on the table. Not a particularly robust deal, no market access, obviously, but with things that would be useful in terms of regulatory cooperation, trade facilitation. If you want to really solve some of these non-tariff barriers that Minister Macleay mentioned earlier, it's that sort of thing you'd be looking for. The deal couldn't be done, and that's a shame because it leaves IPEF resting on some rather shaky pillars, not without value. A lot of value, actually, in the supply chain pillar, potentially. And it's raising questions about, how the US continues to engage in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, the baton is now passed to Peru on APEC. The IPEF negotiations will continue, but I'd suggest it's not going to be very easy to make a lot of progress on the trade pillar in 2024. And meantime, New Zealand is doing fantastic business in the United States based on innovation and key relationships, as we heard from Miles Hurrell and others on this panel earlier. There's a whole good story to tell in the United States. But on these key areas of trade policy, we've got some difficult weather ahead, and we need to maintain that engagement with our friends in the United States, come what may, because they are that important to us.
Thank you, Stephen. Penny, does that mirror what you found on your latest AmCham door knock trip?
It does, very much. Yes, I'll take yours, thank you. Yes, I was very privileged to be included in an AmCham door knock by Mike Hearn and Jonathan Mason. So we went and we knocked on many doors and we met many representatives from the administration, private sector, and on Capitol Hill. And in reflecting the outcome of these discussions, I want to be really clear that our relationship with the states is in really good shape and our companies are doing very well, because it's about to get a bit depressing from here on in. If I was to sum up a few takeaways, I would say this. Not one presentation in DC failed to mention China, first off and at length, to the extent that I actually wondered whether or not we were sort of AmCham or a different organisation on occasion. But clearly everything trade-related is seen through the prism of the geopolitical shift that has happened. And we need to acknowledge that and be very, very clear that there is a great deal of attention accorded to our strategic engagement in the region. And it's lucky that we've actually got a really good strategy to manage that at the moment and that the relationship is in such good shape. Even the free traders on Capitol Hill had reservations and grave reservations about free trade. Some of our traditional champions were saying things like, well, I wouldn't mind some form of an agreement in due course with New Zealand, but mine's a meat, beef and farming state, so we wouldn't want that involved. And then somebody else would say, well, I'm a free trade proponent too, but mine's a dairy space, so a state, so we don't want milk powder engaged, and the conversation proceeded accordingly. we were told unequivocally that we will not get an FTA with the United States in the foreseeable future, and we should stop advocating for it. We were told that there is a chance of getting some sectoral agreements, and that where interests are aligned, there's very good conversations to have about them, but at least for the next sort of 5 or however many years it takes to sort this out, there's no way we're going to get an FTA, and I don't think anybody else will too. Sadly, the WTO is clearly another casualty in the political debate on Capitol Hill. We were essentially told that the organisation wasn't in intensive care. It was on a slab in the morgue of multilateralism, which many people believe hasn't worked for the states and has indeed compromised its broader economic interests. And I think that for the WTO to be rehabilitated in Washington, a lot of perceptions have to change, and probably the organisation does too. In terms of the actual trade dialogue, it was very, very clear that the partisanship is terrible and it's only going to get worse. And some of you have heard this quote before, which I wrote down because I loved it so much. But one of the senators we met with talked about looking at trade and economic debates in Congress like watching a fistful of ferrets fighting in a phone box. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen an FTA negotiated by ferrets, but I suspect it's not actually a particularly good one. And yet, funnily enough, all of us came away with a sense of optimism because there were enough people actually wanting to support New Zealand. There is an investment in the relationships with people that are doing well and being collaborative with the United States. Not really sure how that's going to look in the medium term, but I think it's a very good foundation to have. And the other thing just to stress from an NZ-US Council perspective is we just hear so many success stories of companies that are doing really, really well. And I just want to finish up with one observation, and that's that there are different ways to skin this cat, really, in that there's a lot of business to be done directly with states. There's a lot of business to be done through JVs with other companies directly. There is huge potential for us to develop these good and strong relations that we've got, particularly in sectors which aren't quite so controversial. So in a funny way, the political situation came across as a bit of a train wreck. Can't really use a nicer phrase than that. But the economic potential and the nature of what it means to New Zealand business left me feeling really heartened.
Before I pass to Ben to cast a security lens on it and talk about how MFAT is reading the relationship in the round, I'd just like John to be able to present to you just what the latest research shows. So John's got 3 slides, and it does again bear on that story which has been painted by Penny just a moment ago. Yep.
Sorry, I'm not going to do a dance. Well, yeah. Look, we've just finished a report for the NZ-US Council looking at the bilateral relationship, and Fran said it'd be great after a nice heavy lunch for you to hear from an economist and go through a whole heap of slides and numbers. So you know, I'm here for that. I aim to please. No, I've got 3 slides and I'll make 3 key points and then I'll sit down. Probably. All right. So this first slide just shows the value of New Zealand's imports and exports of goods and services over the past decade. So total trade, two-way, it's about 27.6. There's a rounding error for the eagle-eyed out there. $27.6 billion in the last year. So that makes the relationship our third largest bilateral trading relationship. It compares to about 40 billion for China and about 31 for Australia. So to give that a bit of context, despite the distance between our countries geographically and the lack of a trade agreement, the US relationship is around 90% as large as our relationship with our nearest and dearest trading partner in Australia. I think that's a phenomenal result. Next slide. So, look, first point, the relationship is clearly thriving. The numbers show that. The second point really is that the economic relationship is diversifying. So this chart shows average growth over the last decade in our exports to the US and also to the world. So it's a compare and contrast to see if our relationship with the US has been growing faster than it has with other countries, and the answer is clearly yes. Overall, our exports to the US have been growing at about 8.5% per year over the past decade. That's about twice as fast as our exports to the rest of the world. So there's a huge amount of momentum in that relationship. And the reason why I say it's diversifying is that while we've had strong growth in agricultural exports, stronger than our exports of agricultural products to the rest of the world, the growth in services and non-agricultural goods or manufactured goods is absolutely phenomenal. So services is averaging over 10% export growth every year for the past 10 years. And it's not just tourism. In fact, tourism is relatively underweighted in the services relationship compared to a lot of other countries we export to. So a lot of that is due to things like IT services, gaming exports, a lot of things that perhaps don't get the attention they deserve, but they're going absolutely gangbusters. And non-agricultural products, manufactured products are going very well as well. So I think it's a really positive story around diversification. Our primary exports, of course, always going to be the mainstay, always really important, and they've grown steadily too. But the real growth, the real energy at the moment is coming through our services and non-agricultural products. Lastly, it's a busy slide. So this is our top 25 exports to the US, just for goods. The bars show the value of our exports in the last year. If they're blue, they're primary products. If they're green, they're manufactured products. The numbers in red are the average growth rates over the last decade in terms of our export growth. And what this shows is, yes, we've still got a very strong presence in some of our traditional pastoral exports, meat, dairy, etc. Annoyingly, the way the trade statistics are collected, they put honey in with dairy, which is just stupid. But don't get me started on Statistics New Zealand's classifications. I would be here for hours. So look, it does show our traditional strengths. They're large, they're growing. But some of the fastest, the most dynamic growth is coming from manufactured goods that are really consumer focused. So we're seeing really strong growth in things like natural skin care and cosmetics. Right? They're not massive yet in terms of levels, but they're growing massively, 24% per year growth from a low base, but that's pretty healthy. Medical instruments, things like CPAP, devices for sleep apnea, that's growing very quickly. Wine is going absolutely gangbusters as well. It's averaged 12.5%. Yep, I'll expect my usual payment later on. Case of Riesling, lovely. Yeah, growing at 13+% per year for a decade. That's a phenomenal result. So yeah, I think the relationship is diversifying, and all this is happening without a trade agreement. So I don't think our lack of trade agreement needs to define our economic relationship. Our report, and there's hundreds more charts in the full report, which will be released on the NZUS Council website in the next day or two. They're all there if you want more, and indeed, why wouldn't you? So look, just to summarise, the relationship shouldn't be defined by our lack of a free trade agreement. Our businesses are doing a phenomenal job around that. Yes, of course we want a free trade agreement, goes without saying, but it's not stopping our businesses succeeding.
Thank you, that's a positive story. One of the things that was very noticeable to me at Apec, Ben, and listening to Condi Rice, the former Secretary of State, in conversation with Mike Froman, the former USTR, who didn't manage to get TPP over the line in the end, to his disappointment. But she was making the point that the United States views all relationships now through a security lens, including its friends and trading partners. Would you like to reflect on the New Zealand perspective on that?
Sure, thanks, Fran. And like John, I'd like to thank you for putting me on a panel straight after lunch. It's always fabulous to have the energy in the room, but it is a privilege to be here. And thank you to you and Simon for putting on today's event, which is second time around. It's as good as the first. So thanks very much. Listen, the nexus between economic and security issues is definitely coming closer and closer together. It's something that we in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade spend a lot of time thinking about how we navigate as a small country and a small economy to ensure that we continue to be able to reap the benefits and the opportunities that we come to through the economic sphere, but also how we manage our very important security relationships and our very important security interests. Last year, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade released its once every 3 year strategic assessment, and that really went to the heart of looking at this relationship between economics and security. And it identified 3 shifts. I just want to say these shifts sit along a continuum, and it's not binary. You don't go from one to the other, but what we identified were shifts along a continuum from one pole to another. The first big shift we identified was rules to power. A situation where 20, 30 years ago, it seemed that the preponderance of international law, international rules, norms were pushing in, and for a small country like us, that's really great space. It's easy for us to navigate a world where we know what the rules are, we know where we operate within them, we can use them to get legal remedy if we have our interests cut across, and we can use those to enforce outcomes against big players. For example, US land safeguards back in the 2000s. We've taken Canada to the WTO and won and enforced the judgment. So it's a really great system for a country like us. If you want to see a classic example of how we're moving from rules to power, Russia's illegal and brutal invasion of Ukraine is your best example. But there are many other examples of that where large powers, middle powers, and countries are intentionally looking to move the pole away from rules and towards power as a way of getting their way in the world, because that seems to work better for them right now. Shift 1. Shift 2, economics to security. We see that big time in this region. 20 years ago, again, most of us here have the privilege of having worked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and all of us know that 20 years ago, the medium of exchange in what was then the Asia-Pacific was trade policy, trade agreements. It was the way that countries connected up. It's the way that we did our diplomacy. It's the way we talked to each other. It's how Singapore and Malaysia really started to connect things up through TPP back in the day. They couldn't really do things politically, but they could do things economically, and that sort of helped to knit things together. That's no longer the case. We see dialogue now moving more and more into the security sphere. We see the Quad, we see AUKUS, we see the trilateral security dialogue, and for us, when we're talking in the region as well, yes, we have to talk economics, and we do, and we talk trade, but more and more the dialogue centres around security issues, national security, defence, geostrategic competition. The third shift we see is from what we're calling efficiency to resilience, or just in time to just in case. So efficiency is your way of producing, comparative advantage. Doesn't matter who produces it, doesn't matter where it's produced, how it's produced. You want to get the best product, the best service, the best price right on time. The pandemic gave that a big shock. People are worried about where they get their things from, how they're made, where it's made, how is it produced, can you get access to it in a time of conflict, and will the person you're buying it from sell it to you when you really need it? So that moves you from that efficiency model to a resilience model. Supply chains become really important. Who you work with, who your customers are, what your supply lines are really important. So again, you see that shift. So you think about all of those three shifts in the context of a small country like us that relies on the rules. It makes the outlook more challenging. These are not propitious shifts. These are not shifts that we think these are really great for us. So we focus on the security elements more and more, and I think we are not the only country having to do that. It's not a counsel of despair, though. There are real opportunities for us in this, and I just want to take a moment to reflect on that. We are a trusted partner of the United States, of Canada, of Australia, of the United Kingdom, of Europe. We have a number of trusted relationships through intelligence, through security, our alliance with Australia. And if you think about where tech is developing, if you think about the opportunities and the trade figures that John just showed us, we've got great opportunities to partner, to be part of those supply chains. And IPEF, again, is another great example of how you can use trade policy to actually shore up your economic and your security interests at the same time. Tracy, earlier in the day, talked about IPECTA. Different ways, different layers, different ways of connecting up your supply chains and your access to markets in ways that are resilient will help you economically, but will also help you in the security sphere. And then finally, I'll just say the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade and its advice to the New Zealand government is consistently points out that New Zealand interests are best served by a strong United States. A United States that is in the Indo-Pacific region, that is there diplomatically, it's there in the security space, and it's there economically. So while IPEF may not have delivered in 1 year an amazing blingy outcome, they've made an amazing amount of progress in a year. I'm optimistic that we'll continue to make progress. And while the politics of trade in Washington are dire, and I've been posted there a decade ago and it's worse now than it was then, I'm still a great optimist for the relationship, and we in New Zealand, and our advice to ministers will always be that we need to do everything we can to support, encourage and build United States economic engagement in the Indo-Pacific region. It serves them and it serves our interests very well.
I thought that message was telegraphed very well earlier today by the new Minister of Foreign Affairs. A great deal of determination and clarity there, which I think would be welcome to many of us in this room. Just thinking, going back to that question about US and China, one of the things that struck me, Stephen, at APEC was at the same time President Biden was having really what was quite a huge party with all the key players in APEC. Across town, President Xi was having an amazing dinner with all the tech entrepreneurs, people like Tim Cook from Apple and Elon Musk. They were over there. So what's going on?
I think it's a very visible demonstration that the world is big enough for multiple very large players. And, APEC, of course, by its nature, is the place where all of these things come together, because while you referred to those very large events, there were others going on with other leaders of, Japan and Korea and what have you. But, the world is now, has got a number of different poles of economic activity that are all, to a certain extent vying with each other. The problem arises when we start, coming into different blocks that don't interact and don't overlap and don't. Everybody doesn't have to be in everything. I think this is something the Singapore Prime Minister has said, which is very, very right. The United States is not an RCEP, for example. China is not an IPEF. Not everybody needs to be in everything, but we need a series of economic arrangements, notwithstanding the environment that Ben has just outlined so well, that do bind us together in different ways.
What is the business reaction, I guess, to what Ben has outlined, the role of resilience, for instance, in relationships now?
Well, certainly the resilience of supply chains is top of mind for business all around the world. And I don't think we're going to see that stopping. And that's actually, and I think Ben is right, where the IPF supply chain pillar can play very effectively. Again, it's not the only instrument able to address those issues. Even more conventional FTAs like CPTPP, can do something similar, but IPF is a different way of attacking that problem. And all business leaders now are looking to make sure they do have resilience. We've had a big experience that we have to learn from.
Penny, how do you view it?
Sorry. I agree, and I absolutely echo the supply chain comment. Can I just add one comment about TPP, because it's the one trade issue that I miss. The comments that we heard about that from members of the administration who were actually quite interested in having a follow-up discussion on CTP, that one, was that it would need to be quite radically amended for the United States to be a member. And can I just say, we had all of the ASEAN and AmChams with us, and that went down terribly. They were sort of like, you chose not to come to our party, so now you come wearing our dress code, my friend. And so whether or not that transpires will remain to be seen. But that was one area where there was some degree of enthusiasm.
Just a quick follow-up, if I may. Of course, the United States is not completely without options in this space. USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, is TPP in another form. I don't know whether that at one point could provide some sort of model, and doubtless there would be all sorts of things about that agreement we would find difficult. I don't know. But there's no hope of the United States joining CPTPP. But USMCA is still standing out there, which is one of the reasons why we have to keep on having these discussions with our American friends over the longer term.
I thought ministry officials might have been heartened by the new minister's desire to ensure budgets are retained. Not that you can probably comment, but it was a vote of confidence, I have to say, and for officials in the room today from the new minister, and both actually, also Todd McClay. But in terms of the appetite for trade missions, Stephen, how are we going to be able to fill that? It sounds like Todd is going to be on the road a lot.
Well, coming to a place near you, there's going to be a trade mission every other week, and Ben's going to be marshalling the troops to make sure that happens. We have opportunities all around the world that we've only begun to explore. And of course, there's the United States and India. There is still residual opportunity in China. Southeast Asia was mentioned on several occasions this morning. We've got to hustle. We've got to get out there. We've got to do more precisely in the sort of environment that Ben has described, and all strength to the agency's arm, MFAT, NZTE, if they can lead that effort. And it's something that the business community is going to have to get in behind.
What are the fish hooks in the near-term environment? John, your view.
Which environment in particular? Just
not the political one.
Right, noted. You mean in terms of
business?
In terms of, well, the economic environment is pretty challenging at the moment. The government's coming into a pretty tough time. It'll be looking at the books now, going, "Oh, it's not quite what I expected." And they've got a fairly ambitious 100-day program now with lots of 49 initiatives, is it, from 3 parties? So look, it's going to be a pretty challenging time, but I think we need to just take a longer-term perspective. And thinking about your question around resourcing to the ministry, I've been doing a fair amount of thinking on this, what trade policy might look like next, and I won't give you that spiel today. But for me, it's going to be much less about traditional trade agreements, much more about reducing businesses' transaction costs along their supply chain. So it does come into that resilience aspect as well. And that's a slightly different way of doing trade policy. It's much less, to my mind, about negotiated offer and exchange type agreements, much more about institutional linkages between countries and just trying to shave 1 or 2% of costs of things like non-tariff measures, improving things by 1 or 2% in terms of the efficiency of things at customs and things like that. We've picked all the low-hanging fruit, got a fair amount of the medium-hanging fruit, and now we're on to the really, really tricky stuff. And I think the trade policy architecture across Wellington and beyond needs funding to make sure they address those issues.
I might just pop in there too, Fran, since I'm in my optimistic, sunny mood. And just to say, if you look at Rocket Lab as an example of what can be done and where you don't need a trade agreement, where you need a agreement around a desire to cooperate to use your regulatory frameworks in ways that promote trade and promote collaboration. There's a whole lot of other areas in aerospace where US regulations are tight and make it difficult to get things done, but we've had very positive responses from senior US officials about their willingness to look at those things in the context of a specific sector or a specific company to make it work in the way that we did for Rocket Lab. So if you think about it in that context, there's a whole lot that can be done that doesn't need trade agreements. It can take us into sort of high-tech areas, high-return, innovation, collaboration. There's a lot of opportunity for us.
Just building on that, we heard earlier this morning about the technology dialogue, which officials are looking to form. Can you tell us more about that, what it actually is?
Well, it's an opportunity for us at officials level to think about how we can talk together about regulations, things like quantum computing, things like aerospace, space, all those sorts of high-tech emerging tech areas, artificial intelligence, and to work out how we as officials can provide ministers with advice about how we can just make it easier to do things together. And again, those trusted partnerships we have through Five Eyes, through our partnership and our alliance relationship with Australia will take us a long way because we have trust and confidence at the highest level. So it's really good. And I go back to Minister Macleay's point, which I thought he made so well, was that it's government's job to open doors and to create opportunity for business, and then it's sort of up to them. So if you think of the tech dialogue, that's the context to think about it in.
Yeah, I think it was very exciting, actually, to have a Minister for Space as well, who's also Defence, GCSB, SIS, Science and Technology, a range of things, and all of that has to be pretty much US facing, I would have thought, for a large lump of it. And the Minister, of course, was incredibly excited, would have liked to have been here as well, but was having, I think, 7 different departmental briefings this week, so, it was a very large portfolios. But how does everyone, just because I know we are under time now, Stephen, for you, just how does everyone think about the new opportunities that Ben has really talked about just then?
Well, I think the world is a complicated place and we've got to keep dealing in it. We've got people who are reading the tea leaves for us. We've got the willingness to reach out to our friends around the world, and we've got work to do. I mean, the world's always been complicated. I don't think it's getting any easier, but we've got to make the best we can to deliver the best outcomes for our country and our citizens.
Yeah, I also think we shouldn't ignore our traditional sectors as well, not that we do. I mean, I was watching Fox News one morning because I like to get the real news when I'm in the States. And they were talking about the sort of danger of trade, and then the big advertisement that came in after the news was for a major New Zealand wine company who doesn't have enough wine to supply the market. So I thought that was an irony, but Fox News didn't. But anyway, I think we've got potential in some of those traditional sectors as well.
Yeah, I think as my slide showed, the relationship is diversifying. We're producing a whole lot of things which we're exporting to the US, which are not about displacing US production. A lot of these things are uniquely New Zealand, things like mussels, kiwi fruit, Sauvignon Blanc, Manuka honey. These things are not designed to displace US production, and I think we need to keep telling that story. So it's got to be a dairy and meat and all these other things. We've got a lot of bilateral trade in both directions in IT services. Yeah, that's a big enough sector that we can both find niches in it. Again, it's not about competition between our two economies. It's about cooperation and finding niches. So I'm really, really optimistic about the outlook, which is really weird. It's very rare that as the economist, I'm the hype guy. Yeah.
That's all right. Just a final concluding comment from you, Ben. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I noticed John didn't mention milk and honey in the same sentence there, but I'm going to go. Look, it's I think it's a really exciting time for us as a country. I think there's loads of upside. I think John's 3 slides really showed, as you say, the relationship, the economic relationship's diversifying a lot. And I think the political relationship, which sort of underpins it and is necessary at so many levels, is in really good shape. So I think we're well placed for what comes over the next few years.
That's great. Thank you very much, everyone. Great to see such optimism and also, I guess, persistence and having clarity about what the objectives are in a time which is actually quite difficult internationally, as we've heard. But I mean, we can take great heart from those figures that were produced today that we're doing pretty good, really. We just need a lot more Americas as well as part of the mix. But thank you very much, all of you. Thank you.
Thanks,